Hello and welcome to Open Timelines. I'm your host, Sebastian Martin, and today we have Alfred Lambremont-Weber with us. Alfred Lambremont-Weber is a futurist whose book Exopolitics founded the science of intelligent civilizations in the multiverse and expresses a positive timeline for Earth. Alfred's 1974 book, The Age of Cataclysms, integrates Earth sciences and the psychic remote viewing of Edgar Cayce of a global coastal event and expresses the catastrophic timeline for Earth. Alfred is also the chairman of the Mars Anomaly Research Society, educating about life on Mars. A graduate of Yale University, Yale Law School, and a Fulbright scholar, Alfred has taught economics at Yale University and constitutional law at the University. Alfred is also a director and a faculty member of Exile University, a non-profit educational entity for continuing online education in exosciences, sciences, and exopolitics. You can reach him at exopolitics.com as well as exouniversity.org, the continuing education in exosciences, sciences, and exopolitics. Alfred, welcome.
Thank you.
I should probably tell the audience exactly what happened. So I was supposed to be interviewed by you today and not the other way around. And because I had a very strange encounter while being in America and attempting to interview Laura Eisenhower for this kind of show, I was bombarded with lots of interferences, and I felt that I had to cancel the interviews and go back to Canada. And I also made the decisions to cancel all of my interviews based on the experiences I had. And I emailed you, and you then suggested to reverse the roles of me interviewing you for your memoirs that you just wrote. And I had to go through, I think, about 700 pages of text. But it was very enlightening and very rich. I have to say that you had such a full life. I mean, it's just incredible what you had to go through. I feel humbled by your experiences. And at the same time, I was also interested to see that you had your first encounter, extraterrestrial encounter in 1973. So you were, 31 years old at the time?
Yes, I was.
Mm-hmm. So
31.
You were so you finished your degree. You were like a full lawyer at the time. And what made you experience that being at the time? Do you know exactly why this happened at that time exactly?
Yes, that's a good question. And I just wanted to go back to the bio first,
Okay.
because you mentioned my book, Exopolitics, and then my book, The Age of Cataclysm,
Yes.
which was written in 1973, which expressed the cataclysmic timeline. Fortunately, we veered off of the cataclysmic timeline, and I've written two other books which express the positive timeline,
Mm-hmm.
which is The Omniverse, and my memoir, which is My Journey Landing Heaven on Earth. So
Right.
The book on the cataclysmic timeline has been voided.
Okay.
Thank God.
Okay. That's good to know.
I just want to get that straight. Yeah. So let me go back to your question, which is a very good question. It's both man proposes, God disposes, right? That type of a thing. And toward the end of 1972, I was then the general counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration in the city of New York. And it was a very by rationalist, positivist, third density time-space standards, conventional standards. It was a very exciting time. The environmental movement had just started. It was in an exciting metropolitan jurisdiction, New York, one of the leading cities at that time. The mayor was Mayor John Lindsay, who was he was wanted to change things and had brought in Jerome Kretschmer, and we were at the leading edge of the environmental protection movement. Okay, and I was the general counsel, and I had a whole number of lawyers, and we were crusading environmentalists, and we were writing all sorts of advanced laws. Privately, I was undergoing the consciousness revolution. I had gone to Woodstock, which had happened at that time, which is the music revolution. We had been involved in protesting the war. I had been involved in the consciousness revolution. I had gone to Ram Dass house up in New Hampshire and meditated with him, and had all kinds of experiences there from a meditation point of view. And toward the end of 1972, I could see internally that the rationalist positivist answer, all we need to do is change the laws and everything will be okay, is not the answer for our planet, because we live in a multidimensional reality. And I was reading books at that time privately outside of my work, like Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain by Ostrander and Schroeder. They would soon become my colleagues because they were published by G.P. Putnam's, who would become the publisher of my first book in the multidimensional area. So I was kind of at that toward the end of 1972. And at that time, coincidentally, John Lindsay decided to run for president of the United States. Jerome Kretschmer decided to run for mayor of New York. So all the people that had brought me in to do all this changing decided to advance themselves in politics, in third density politics. And that's not where I was going. I was going into the multidimensional world.
Mm-hmm.
So as the New Year's changed, I said, I really want to leave government. And I was looking for a multidimensional change, and I was looking for somebody in parapsychology, in extraterrestrial affairs, and as it turned out, my cousin Ann Weber was a psychotherapist at the Karen Horney Institute in New York, and her colleague Barbara Liss was a psychotherapist there also. And her husband, Dr. Philip Liss, was a professor of experimental psychology at Rutgers University, but he was also a parapsychologist. So they introduced us, and at the beginning of January, we went to a party at their apartment on the Upper West Side on West End Avenue, and we met there, and he was an expert in parapsychology, in extraterrestrial affairs. He had just been to the Nenki Institute in Poland. He had had contact with interdimensional ETs, and suddenly we fell into this conversation, which was amazing. And then, so I made my decision over the next couple of weeks to really say, I'm going to hand in my resignation, and I'm going to go full-time freelance into this new area, because I came from a family. My grandfather was a professor at Tulane and had written some of the leading edge books on evaporation and made a number of inventions. So I come from a family where people, really live by their own wits from an intellectual point of view and write books. It's very familiar. So I just took my grandfather as a role model. And that's what I did. I handed in my resignation and began an intellectual partnership with Dr. Philip Liss. And at the beginning of February of 1973, my wife, Teresa, she has since passed over, a very wonderful soul. She was a Peruvian Chinese, and she was an architect by profession. And we lived in a loft in in the south of Houston area in New York. It was factory lofts that then were changing over into artists' residence. And so we had taken over what had been a warehouse of religious objects that was filled with barrels, that were filled with gilded holy cards of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph.
Mhm.
So we had to clear those out. And then Teresa designed and built a very beautiful multi-leveled space that was later featured in New York Magazine. I kind of want to set the stage of it, kind of a super modernistic, multi-level space in the middle of New York City's Soho district. It's kind of surreal. So she had to go at the beginning of February 1973 to Vermont. She went up there to design some ski houses, and I was left alone with our then 2-year-old son, Freddie.
Mm-hmm.
And it was late at night, and at that time I was jumped into the new field, the new multi-dimensional field, and I was busy researching. I was following the path of the scientist Sir Isaac Newton. I was decoding biblical prophecy, hermeneutics, trying to correlate different things. And suddenly, it's like I was inside of a presence, a multi-dimensional presence, which enveloped me, and we began to communicate telepathically, but with a very high emotional tone. And so we were communicating telepathically, and I was kind of like, whoa, what is this?
Were you able to see anything?
No, it was like if I was inside an unseen presence. And at the same time, I knew that these things existed because I had been studying about ET contactees. And so I knew at the same time there was a part of my brain that was observing and participating. And so we started talking back and forth, but it was a very powerful, I was kind of in a reverie, I would say. It was a very, the intellectual power of this entity was more powerful than my entity, than my brain.
And did you feel any like buzzing or sounds beforehand, or electric, static electricity, something changed in the room other than just hearing?
No, it was like my memory is that I was sitting at my desk, and then all of a sudden it was like I was kind of taken over, or not taken over, but sort of enveloped. And so that it was, my attention was taken away from the book and paper I was working on, and I was like engrossed in this telepathic conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember asking all of a sudden, who are you? And then it said very slowly, it said, I am the Holy Spirit. And I just went, because those are buzzwords, because I come from a half Cuban family where there was a Jesuit priest as my uncle, and I was raised in Catholic boarding schools. And the Holy Spirit is one of the entities in the triune Christian God.
Mm-hmm.
There's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. So the Holy Spirit is the triune God. So up till the end of high school, I was raised inside this catechism or theology. So even though I was 31, I mean, it still was like a buzzword,
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like,
it's interesting, the parallels, because you are a young father of 31 years old with a 2-year-old son. And when I had my experiences, I was 35 years old with a 1-year-old daughter. So,
oh, there you go.
and I was not anticipating any of this, and I was not studying metaphysics or paranormal whatsoever. I was not that whatsoever. It just approached me a different way, not as a Holy Spirit, but as a Pleiadian. So that's very interesting. So you had that kind of expression of the Holy Spirit through you, and then what else did he tell you? Can you explain?
Yeah, I will. Well, then, remember, this is 1973. So then, and then I said, well, who am I? Because, why is this thing happening to me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then it said, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will found my church. Okay. Now, this thing knocked me out because that's a direct quote from a passage in Matthew in the Synoptic Gospels in the New Testament, where Jesus is founding his church, supposedly. I mean, there's all sorts of historical disputes as, did Jesus really exist? If he did exist, are the Synoptic Gospels correct? Was Jesus crucified? I mean, we could go on with all that historical. However, that's what this entity said to me, and it I mean, it was a real mind jammer for me,
Right.
I mean, interdimensional encounters like ET contactees, I know that the history of it, for those of us who study it, the ET contactee is always, there's a large number of them that are always charged with a, quote, messianic mission. They grab them through whatever psychological triggers they have. So I guess at that stage, 31 years old, that's a typical age. Jesus was 31 when he did his public mission. 30 to 35 is where awakenings typically happen for the male. There are studies of that. Spiritual awakenings typically happen from 30 to 31 or so. I guess that was the trigger or the story that entity or whatever decided would grab me, right? So,
and do you think that perhaps this entity introducing itself as the Holy Spirit may have been something else altogether?
I have spent the last 40 plus years in which I did not advertise this. This is the first time that I've really come out publicly, and I've had over 40 years in exopolitics and ufology with a book and publicly talking about it, because I figured it would completely sideline and derail. I mean, some of my stuff is so far out that it would derail a lot of my work, some of which is as a judge, some of which is, on very frontier stuff anyway. And this would be like, the cherry on the cake. It would say, this guy's a fruitcake, and we're just not going to take him seriously. So it's not until now, April 19th, 2017, and there's a story behind this that goes back to 2017 of why I did that I'd like to, at some point in our interview, just take a short time. It's just a short story as to why I wrote this book and why I published it, which wasn't supposed to happen until 2025. Okay, I had a timing. I wasn't going to publish this until 2025 when I figured that nobody would care at that point. But I was pushed to publish it, to write it in 2015, and I was pushed to publish it now. I mean, I pushed beyond what my original plan was. Well, to get back to your story, so I said, thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will found my church. And that threw me back emotionally. I mean, my heart started pounding. I really, I was kind of really at the edge, because I grew up a committed Catholic. I have to say that. I went to boarding schools. I was a very serious student. I was always like, I was one of those guys who was at the top of my class. I studied hard. I don't know if people have been to boarding schools, but in my
I
era,
have.
yeah, so there's a lot of hazing that goes on, at boarding schools. It's a tough life.
Mhm.
And for me, the only way that I felt I could like protect myself was to study hard and do well. And that was my protection against the bullying and the hazing that goes at an all-male Catholic boarding schools. And I went to a number of them in Florida, in the Washington, D.C. area. In fact, in the Florida, I went to a Benedictine boarding school where they kicked out a number of the monks at around Christmas time because they had sexually assaulted a number of the young students.
Mhm.
So it was a very tough environment. Yeah.
Mhm. So you also mentioned in your experience that you also had missing time, which is something that I've experienced as well for 2.5 hours. I was not aware of it at the time, only when I picked up my tea and I saw the clock, and that's when I realized that I had some missing time. But to me, the conversation I had felt like 15 minutes. How long did it feel like for you when you were in conversation with the Holy Spirit?
This event happened around midnight,
Mm-hmm.
and then I think I concluded and kind of woke up and went to bed around 4 or 5 a.m. So I think I had missing time in there of 2 to 3 hours, which would have been from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. maybe, or 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. And over the years, because I spent so many years just silently speculating about it, because I didn't share with anybody because it was so bizarre and outside of my experience. But basically, in that time, I was shown movies, like movies of the future, and I was given like a download of what my future life would be. But not that I could remember. I kept on trying to remember it, but it was like a briefing,
Mm-hmm.
And then during my life, I bumped into people who say, yeah, I remember you from the ship,
Hmm.
And I'll tell you how wild it is. And we might get into this in our interview. I don't know, because part of what I cover in the book, I cover when this was in 73. By 4 years later, in 77, I was director of the President Jimmy Carter White House communication study, White House ET communication study. 4 years after that, that was directly connected with the Holy Spirit experience. And John Kelly and John Kelly is an ET expert here, a UFO expert here in Vancouver, who makes films
Mm-hmm.
on UFOs,
Yes, I
and a
know him.
reporter,
Mm-hmm.
a very excellent reporter. He and I have done a report showing that Jimmy Carter has not only published a UFO contactee report, is a UFO contactee, but maybe a UFO abductee also. So what I think, and I know this is going to sound totally insane, but we have to just say these things. I think that in that missing time, I may have been on the ship and debriefed, but also Jimmy Carter may have been on the same ship and debriefed about the White House extraterrestrial communication project that we were going to be in together 4 years later in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
Because he had just gone public. He just went public in 1973, just a few months later during his gubernatorial campaign, and posted his ET report while he was campaigning for governor in Georgia, just a few months after that.
Mm-hmm.
And and my experience was in February of 1973.
Right.
So I think that the ETs may have been coordinating all of this, and that the other person who said to me that, oh yeah, I saw you on the ships. This was a colleague of mine, and he remarked it to me, and and my inner guides just said that I had permission to say it. He hasn't given me permission to say it, but he remarked it to me once that he saw me on the ship. He is a U.S. chrononaut who's been a time traveler and a childhood time traveler and a Mars experiencer named Andrew D. Basiago,
Right.
who has run for president. Now, he said to me, oh, yeah, I've seen you on the ships. So maybe that was it. At that time, I'm just thinking that they had Carter there, they had me there, they had Andy there. I mean, this is how all this stuff is coordinated at that level. I'm just tossing out hypotheses, and people can say, oh, that's absolutely nuts. I mean, but no, because what we've done is with scientific rigor at the level of Oxford University, which wrote to me, and it was from a request from Oxford University, which requested that I write a book on extraterrestrials and the law, that my book, The Omniverse, came out. So we have set out and proven at the level of university science, scientific method, what the dimensional ecology is like. So we have proven that at that standard of proof. So when I'm speculating here, this is speculation, but it's informed speculation. Now, I wasn't going to come out with this until 2025, but I decided to come out with it now. And there's so many other synchronicities. The one when Jimmy Carter had his brain cancer, before he had his brain cancer, which thankfully has been cured, he said that the one legacy that he was going to continue was the legacy that he gave to the very excellent high school that he visited in California, which is the high school that my wife, Geraldine, graduated from. So, which he went with his wife. So there are all these coincidences. And after the Jimmy Carter White House experience, which the Men in Black at the Pentagon, you can get the book and you'll get all of the action of how the Men in Black at the Pentagon chased me at Washington National Airport, and it was, at the passenger scene at the waiting room. I mean, it's a great movie. I actually wrote it as a screenplay, right? And my son is an Oxford trained actor. So I was saying, hey, maybe Freddie can play me, I mean, I was just, trying to have fun, right?
I have my share of Men in Black myself, since I just came out with my own story, so I can.
Oh boy!
So prior to your profound encounter that you had in '73 and you missing time, so you believe that you've actually given a speech to the CIA, DARPA, as well as Project Pegasus in 1971.
Yes.
So you believe that they traveled back from 2005 when you published Exopolitics to 1971. So you mentioned also in your book, in your memoirs, that Andrew Basiago in August of 2012 said that time travel using children stopped in the early 1970s because of potential alternative and differing timelines. So why would the CIA or DARPA have traveled back from 2005 to 1971 when the timelines may not have been able to be reliable? Do you know why this could have happened?
Yeah. I understand your question, and actually you're talking about apples and oranges in the question.
Okay.
So I just wanted to get these because it makes it simpler. This is my book, Exopolitics, that was physically published in 2005. And the online version of this, published in the year 2000, founded the science of exopolitics and gave rise to the exopolitics movement. And the 2005 softcover version was time traveled by using DARPA Project Pegasus secret time travel technology. They time travel this book back to 1971 and even earlier to the Project Pegasus time travel project, which was run by DARPA under the administration of the Department of Defense, with Donald Rumsfeld as the defense attaché, under the national security advisor of Henry Kissinger and the presidency of Richard Nixon. So this was carried back in time physically by technology of DARPA and the CIA to 1971, where it was examined and viewed by teams, including at one point Andy Basiago and his father, who was like his handler inside that, and they had to use children, and another person, and they brought a satchel, which is where they brought time science materials brought from the future back to the present, and they opened it up and out popped Exopolitics by Alfred Lamont Weber, and that had been brought back from the future to 1971, and that's where Andy Basiago first saw the name Alfred Lamont Weber.
Right.
However, we have some more probable cause evidence that this book was actually, so I have supporting evidence in that in 1971, I was the general counsel of the Environmental Protection Administration of New York, as I mentioned, and in that year, I was invited out. Part of my duties were to go out into the public and speak about protecting the environment. And I got one such invitation from a group called the Delaware Valley Industrial Engineering Association. So I went there, and when they came to pick me up, it was very different from the usual students and housewives that I used to go and speak to. It was a gentleman in a suit, and we got in the car and we drove for about 2 hours south. And when I got there, it was a nondescript building. It went up to the second floor. There were about 50 men in suits. And I grew up in Cuba because my father was in the sugar business. My mother was from a Cuban family, and Fidel Castro used to come to my grandmother's house for Sunday dinner because he played basketball on the team from the Jesuit high school with one of my uncles. So I'm familiar with all that, and we were confiscated by the revolution. I was in jail under Batista and under Castro. So I know spooks. By that time, even though I hadn't been in any army or anything, I knew the whole vibe, and I knew that those people were spooks. I was in a room with 50 officials of the Department of Defense and the CIA, and this meeting was not with the Delaware Valley Industrial Administration. I knew it because I had lived through a communist revolution and survived. Okay?
Right.
And so I had my double eyes on. A este cubanito no le van a hacer nada, ¿tú me entiendes? Which is Cuban for saying, hey man, I'm a little Cuban boy and you're not going to get me. You just have to say, you have a sense of like social survival, right?
Right.
So then I just went forward and I just played it straight, and I gave my best performance of And at the end, and during it, the members of the audience were making faces at me and trying to get me off of my game, right? They were going like that.
Really?
It was real psychological warfare.
So weird.
They were gang stalking me, okay? And I just stood there like anything. And then at the end, they gave me a standing ovation, gave me a mug that said Delaware Valley Industrial Association. So I went back and boom. So I call it time travel surveillance, okay? Right? They surveyed me using advanced quantum access time travel because they went and got my book from the future. And then they knew that I would be doing that 40 years in advance. And then they came in and they brought me in 1971 and they did that. Now,
you mentioned that your dad was in the sugar business, or your granddad.
Yeah.
I thought he was in the Navy.
No, my father, I was actually born at the U.S. Naval Air Station Hospital in Pensacola, Florida, on May 24th, 1942, because my father had been in NROTC, the Navy ROTC cadet training when he was at Yale University as a student. And what that meant is that as soon as Pearl Harbor happened, he was called into active duty, and he was assigned, his first assignment was down to the Naval Air Base at Pensacola to train the air cadets, because that's where they train the air cadets. So he was training the air cadets in something, but he was just in the Navy for the duration of the Second World War. And then he left the Navy and he joined my grandfather in the sugar business. My grandfather was in the sugar business as a consulting engineer, and my father became a consulting engineer.
So now we're going to be like jumping forward a bit with the age of cataclysms. I know you mentioned that this was part of a past timeline, but I would like to mention that because so you co-wrote this book with Philip Liss.
Liss, Liss.
And the book references to the west coast of the US and potentially Canada, that it could collapse. Yet you now live in Vancouver, and when you move to Vancouver, you still believe that potentially that timeline will still be existing or real.
Well, not only that, when I published the Age of Cataclysm, it was published in 1975. It was written in 1973, and it was the first book that integrated the earth sciences with the psychic predictions of future cataclysm. Okay, of both in the biblical prophecies and in many of the traditions, and in the Edgar Cayce psychic predictions. So I integrated all of that, and it was the first one. It was in all the airport bookstores throughout the United States, and I was on mainstream television, and I was invited up to Vancouver to be on the CBC TV evening show with Peter Zowski. It would be like the Tonight Show here in the U.S., like with Johnny Carson or something, and that was with Peter Zowski. So my function then with the Age of Cataclysm, I still have a copy of it here, which is say, this is what's going to happen. We all have to wake up. There's a cataclysm coming. That was my function. It was all over, and then that gave rise to all of the books. We Are the Earthquake, Generation, and all of that. That gave rise to all of that.
So when do you think this timeline changed?
It changed on December 21st, 2012, because then we entered a portal into a new yuga, into a whole new timeline into a new compartment.
So, which leads me to the same question as to know why you made a move in 1998 to permanently move to Canada and on the west coast of Vancouver. I mean, of Canada in Vancouver.
Yeah, no, I actually moved to Canada initially. As you know, this is my book, My Journey, Landing Heaven on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and this is a whole story. This is like a movie in itself. But I actually, and we're kind of going back and forth in the story. But what happened the first time I moved to Canada, and incidentally, on my mother's side, I'm Canadian, because my mother, my great-great-grandfather was a Chisholm from Scotland who moved to Nova Scotia in Scotland and then moved down to Cuba to help found an engineering firm that built the sugar mills in Cuba. And my other grandfather and he became business partners there. You see that? So I'm actually a Canadian that came back to Cuba.
Right.
I mean, to Canada. I know, it's crazy. But, yeah, but look, so I actually came back to Canada in the 1970s and in the 1980s. I came back to Canada originally during the Reagan administration after I was invited here in Ontario by a spiritual group
Kingdom of
that
Heaven.
claimed, that claimed that they had been taken up as a group. 150 of them have been taken up in a spaceship as a group in 1976.
We will get there along the line, but I would like to backtrack again.
Yeah.
So you said that the book was written in 1973. You moved to Canada in 1998, I believe.
Yeah, that's my second.
Yes.
Yeah, that's my current living in Canada.
Right. So why did you decide to make the move? I mean, I've seen cataclysms of my own when before I had my own encounter, and I was really traumatized by it because I was seeing them almost on a daily basis and on angles.
Okay, this is what happened. And again, you've asked a person like me why I decided to move to Canada. Mm-hmm. And the background is that at that time, Jerry and I were living at the Mexico-Texas border in Brownsville, Texas, the southmost city in the United States, right by the border. It was beautiful with a resaca, these streams, and we had everything. We were in a forest there. It was just beautiful. George Bush had just become governor. I had just met him there, shaking his hand. And one day I came back from work, and this was old growth forest. That's where James Audubon came through and drew all the birds, and the birds told me to move back to Canada to help save the world.
Right. So this is what you wrote in your memoirs.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm kind of curious, because you heard this, and you still went despite the fact that you were a fervent believer in the age of cataclysms at the time. You still believe the timeline would exist.
Yeah, but through my deeper consciousness, I knew that I was following a positive timeline, i.e., all of the cataclysms may be happening out there. However, I knew that I was on a mission from God. The Blues Brothers.
And you were protected.
Movies. Yeah. I mean, I still don't know. I was asking myself today, my God, why am I still alive?
Well, so going back to the 1977 Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study. So you were working for the Stanford Research Institute,
Yes.
And that was a major turning point for you because you suffered major health issues arising from that. You resigned as a director from the SRI, and then you decide to leave in a camper van after Teresa, your first wife, left you, and you felt at your probably your lowest point in your life at that time. Yet you described that was you gain awareness from these experiences. So while you were attacked by energy weapons and all of these things, do you think? I was thinking about this because you're not the first person that mentioned this. Some of them were attacked by the Men in Black, and they also had the same kind of enlightenment or rise in awareness, which leads me to ask you: do you think that maybe for what you suffered from was somehow intentional, so you could have actually raised your level of consciousness potentially?
Yeah, I think that my raising my level of consciousness was part of, you have the fight or flight, and it was a flight reaction to go into a higher level of consciousness, because the Men in Black and all of the things that were chasing me could not reach the higher level. So I just went into a higher level.
Yeah, so you got triggered, or you probably had the
Yeah.
downloads that you had since probably 1973, and
Yeah.
unknowingly you just triggered it and developed it, and now you gain full awareness.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned that during your time at the Stanford Research Institute, that you were in direct contact with remote viewing and the world of Ingo Swann.
Yeah.
I just finished an interview last week with a person who lives on Vancouver Island, who was actually trained on remote viewing. And we kind of mentioned the fact that Ingo Swann may have worked with the CIA. And obviously, the Stanford Research Institute was heavily involved with the Pentagon, the White House, potentially the CIA. They had over $100 million budgets at the time. So do you think that the remote viewing aspect, when you first discovered it in the 70s, compared to what it is today, do you think it changed dramatically? And do you think it evolved at a much higher level? What is your experience in that?
Well, yeah, that's a very complex question that you've asked. You've asked a very, very complex question, because we have to make a number of distinctions in that question. Because obviously the first distinction that we have to make is between contract research, remote viewing under contract research at institutions like Stanford Research and the CIA, and remote viewing that individuals do on their own. Those are two separate things. Boom. And so let's go to the one contract research over here. And when I first went to SRI, the people that introduced me there, I got an introduction to, first I went to Ingo Swann, and then Ingo Swann and another friend of mine introduced me to their remote viewing, to the remote viewers there. Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. Boom.
Yes, that's right. That's
I
right.
just had to get to that.
That's right. That's right. Okay, had you there. Yes, in 1977.
Yeah.
Yes.
Blast from the past. So, so I was introduced to Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, and I went to SRI over the Christmas holidays and visited with them and described my proposal to do the first scientific civilian-led extraterrestrial communication study. as opposed to a military or CIA. And they said, wow, you should do it in the Futurist Center. And he called up Peter Schwartz, who was one of the leading futurists there. There were about five or six futurists with Peter Schwartz. Now, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ, it's very funny because Russell Targ's father was my editor at G.P. Putnam's, who was editing my book, The Age of Cataclysm. So it's a very interconnected world, right?
Yes.
Boom. So then Targ and Puthoff, their contract for remote viewing with Ingo Swann, who had introduced me to them, was with CIA. Okay. And so then I was introduced to the futurists to do the Carter White House extraterrestrial communication study. And I went and I met Peter Schwartz and I described it to all of the members there, and then was given an offer to be a futurist and to do the study, which I accepted. And the reason that I did it is that President Carter had sent me a direct messenger who was a prominent Atlanta attorney who met with me at the Carlisle Hotel because I had helped Congressman Henry B. Gonzalez get the House Select Committee started to investigate the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Malcolm X started. And the reason that he did it is that President Carter's mother, Lillian Carter, there's possibly some information that Lillian Carter was Joseph Kennedy's private secretary in the 1920s and became pregnant by Joseph Kennedy. And then Joseph Kennedy sent Lillian Carter down to Georgia, where she married a prominent man who loved her. And so Jimmy Carter's true father is the same father as John Kennedy's father. And John Kennedy and Jimmy Carter are half brothers. Okay? So that's some of the undercurrents in all of this. And that's why, so Jimmy Carter had already sent a personal envoy, a prominent attorney to me. So here we had gotten the approval of the reason I was hired at SRI as a futurist is because I had been invited to a dinner on Capitol Hill by this envoy. I went to Washington and I met with all the inner Carter circle. They said, "Are you going to work with Peanut?" They called him Peanut. So then it was there that I got the idea that what we needed was the first civilian extraterrestrial study, not governed by CIA, not governed by military. So then we went to, and what had happened at the Futurist Institute is that the Futurist Institute had gotten a contract from CIA called Alternative Futures through the year 2025. However, Peter Schwartz, who was the fellow that brought me into the Institute, had poured blood on the files. So the CIA was thrown out of that center. And in fact, I saw the CIA meeting with the director of that particular file downstairs a little later, and they kind of went, so they were thrown out of there. You follow me?
Right.
And that director, who I later saw in New York, died of brain cancer. So I'm sure the CIA killed him. You follow what I'm saying? They're really bad people. So
Yeah. So
So
going back to the remote viewing aspect,
yeah.
you were introduced
So
to the SRI through Ingo Swan, but what was your involvement in remote viewing itself, and how you had none?
no. But I was there to put together the extraterrestrial study with the Jimmy Carter White House.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I just happened to meet with Pudov and Targ, who were doing the remote viewing center, and they introduced me to the Futurist Center, which then put together.
Mm-hmm.
I entrepreneured the Carter White House study out of the Futurist Center, which didn't operate on remote viewing.
Okay.
Perhaps if the Carter White House study had gotten underway, perhaps I would have subcontracted to the remote viewers to do some remote viewing as part of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
Because Courtney Brown, who has done a forward here, has already done interactive remote viewing with the Galactic Council for the Milky Way galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, we were going to do remote viewing with the Galactic Council. We were going to reestablish relations for planet Earth. That was the whole plan of this study.
Mm-hmm. And have you actually completed the study?
No. What happened was I went there after it was approved, and this is all set out here in my book, including my affidavit, my disclosure project affidavit.
Mm-hmm.
Under the May 9th, there was a press conference held of the disclosure project on May 9th at the National Press Club, May 9, 2001. And that press release went out under two names, Dr. Stephen Greer, MD, and Alfred Lamont Weber, JD, MN. It went out under two names. And what happened is, I was on a U.S. Senate panel for U.S. national security needs for the year 2000. This was in 1977.
Mm-hmm.
The other members of the panel were things like the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Right next to me was Senator Sam Nunn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And out of that, I had to go meet with a U.S. With the Assistant Secretary of Defense on the issue of satellite weaponry, anti-satellite weaponry, which came up just this past weekend in connection with the North Koreans.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went into that meeting with the Assistant Secretary of Defense in October of 1977, I was attacked with direct energy weapons at the inner ring of the Pentagon, the E ring, and it was a very serious attack, and it was meant to disable me.
So when you went in 1977 to the Pentagon, how much of the study have you ever started?
I had started the prospectus of the study. I had enlisted leading scientists. I had the director of physics at Stanford University. I had a leading French scientist. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's been in movies and he's very famous. Okay,
Yes,
you probably know him.
I know. Yeah.
I had the National Academy of Sciences, and I had the White House had just approved it. They had just approved it.
Mm-hmm.
Jimmy Carter had just approved it.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Domestic Council of the White House had just approved it.
And then you had a visit of Pentagon officials telling you there are no UFOs.
And then after that, first I was hit with directed energy weapons at the Pentagon. Then I was attacked and followed by men in black at the Washington airport. Then I was going to meet with the district attorney. I went to New Orleans to visit my brother who was studying architecture at Tulane, but also to see the King Tut exhibit, which was in Washington, and also to see the district attorney of New Orleans who was investigating the JFK assassination, because I was serving as an advisor to the House Select Committee on Assassinations, investigating the John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King assassination.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was attacked with directed energy weapons again at the King Tut exhibit. And then when I got back to Stanford Research Institute, I was called into a meeting with a high-ranking official, I think he was the vice president of SRI, and the liaison with the Pentagon liaison with SRI came in and said, this study is not going forward. If it goes forward, all the studies contracts between SRI and the Pentagon will be canceled. And they had $100 million budget, and that's probably $25 million would be canceled if my study went forward. So they stopped it.
Mm-hmm. So now, personally, you kind of had a crash after that. Obviously, like, you know, your funds were shut off. You resigned from the SRI, and you decided to go to Canada, and you ended up at the Kingdom of Heaven.
Well, that's after a long circuit. I went to Africa, to West Africa, to visit my parents in the Ivory Coast. You know, I was kind of getting over all the physical damage that happened with these directed energy attacks. I went to Mexico as a journalist. I covered the Pope's visit there. I covered Jimmy Carter's visit there. I covered the president of France, Giscard d'Estaing. Yeah, it was a whole thing. And I was in cosmic consciousness then. I mean, the directed energy weapons threw me into a cosmic consciousness. And ever since then, I've had the consciousness of my journey landing heaven on earth. Because I felt that it was the dark forces that really were interfering this, because they were trying to keep humanity down. Because Jimmy Carter was ready to go forward with reestablishing deep communication with the rest of the cosmos. I really think so.
Now, based on the fact that you also helped Pierre Lévesque at the Kingdom of Heaven when you moved to Canada in Ontario. 25 litigation cases. You collected a default judgment against the government of Ontario that was $750 million. That was overturned at the end. But you still covered him until 1991, I believe. Is that right? So you are a minister within their organization, right? And now what you wrote, which is quite interesting, you said that it was almost like a cult, or it was a false prophet, or it was a manifestation of cosmic falsehood, is what you wrote. Yet you wrote this obviously in your memoirs, but then at some point in life, I think it was in 1991, which is when you stopped obviously covering his cases, you barely escaped the organization. There was an attempted assassination against you at the Kingdom of Heaven. And yet you got depressed over 2 years, and then in 1993, you went back to confront him. So could you tell me exactly why you decided to do this? I mean, you're a very sane person. You're a smart guy.
Well, there, my better other half really kind of filled in the picture here.
Mhm.
And you know, and so this is where readers have to read and decide for themselves. And what Pierre R. Levesque was for me was an incomplete from the Atlantean destruction, from the incarnation in the Atlantean destruction.
Mhm.
And we were both figures in the power world in Atlantis, and we were both involved in the Atlantean destruction. And we were here to relive all of that, and we hadn't finalized it, and that's what our time here was. It was a karmic relationship, and it was part of my fitting that out and part of my soul development, I guess, over the last 40 years. And that's part of learning, you know, part of a soul development and enlightening experience. I mean,
Mhm.
you know, I didn't come into this world totally enlightened, and I think I state that in the book, and I'm not completely enlightened now, but I try to show, hey, this is what it's all about, you know?
Right.
I mean, you know, and saying that, yeah, you know, yeah, I was in Atlantis, and I did have this thing with this guy here in which we, you know, did it. And then my wife, who for a living does these kind of readings and, you know, has been trained and has a fairly good track record, etc., said, well, look, think of it this way.
Yes. I mean, to me, for what I'm reading through your memoirs from your
Yeah,
experience there, this is after the facts. I understand
yeah,
that while you were there, you had a total different mindset. But to me, when I read it, it
yeah,
sounded like he had, Pierre Levesque had an ego larger than life, and
yeah,
putting himself God and seeing you as the Antichrist or his antithesis.
yeah,
You know what? To me, it was very, it was toxic. It looked toxic,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
and yet you stay there for 7 years. You know,
yeah, yeah.
it's a long time.
Well, right. Uh, uh, I did that because I was in exile from the United States.
Hmm.
As I describe in this book, I was living in uh, uh, there was a futurist, a very famous futurist in the United States, whose family, uh, she was the heiress of a toy king in the U.S., and they had bought the mansion of Justice Charles Evan Hughes in Rock Creek Park, this big mansion, and it was kind of an intellectual center, and I was invited to be there for a few months.
Hmm.
And what occurred to me is that I would take the car and I would go driving around Washington. One event is I was invited up by a television station to go to a discussion to meet with TV producers up in Baltimore to talk about a program, because I just come back from Amsterdam, and De Waarheid, the Communist Party newspaper in Amsterdam, had asked me to be their U.S. correspondent during the Reagan administration. So I get back from that dinner and I'm going back to the house, and literally 10 Secret Service cars, these are light blue cars, surround my car, and I'm just driving along. I'm just a journalist. I mean, I'm just making my way, you know? I mean, I couldn't stand that pressure.
Hmm.
And so I exiled myself to this commune in Canada. They invited me up there for a weekend workshop. I went up there and they had a copy of my book in their library and seemed to say, oh man, you've arrived, you know? And I said, okay. So it was a safe space, because every time I would go back to the US, if I would come in to an airport, literally 15 to 20 policemen, uniformed policemen, would be waiting for me at the airport gate to gang stalk me.
Right.
It was impossible to enter and to live in the US. They made my life, and I'm a US citizen, and on my mother's side, part of my family came over on the Mayflower, John Alden, and on my father's side, we go back to the French part, to the early 18th century in Louisiana. So they have taken away my constitutional rights to live in the US.
So in 2000, you started writing Exopolitics, and your main focus was to explain that Earth has been outcast among the community of universe civilizations. So what gave you that belief exactly? You received telepathic communication
the quarantine. No, what I did is that going back to 1973, starting with my studies at the end of 1972 with Philip Liss, during all that time, I was studying. And so in 1999, in 1998, we moved to Vancouver. We had an apartment in Kitsilano across on York Avenue, across from this beautiful red schoolhouse. And I sat down and I wrote a few books, one of which was Exopolitics, which I put up as a free book online, which was sort of an extended essay on the populated, on the fact that our universe and our multiverse is highly populated and highly organized. And it comes, and that's an integrated essay from all of my research. I mean, you can go to all of the UFO research that I did in 1973 to 1976, all of the extended, the Kelly Hopkinsville case. I mean, I was going to UFO and presenting at UFO conferences in 1974 and 1975.
But yet the four reasons you use to explain why humanity does not conform to a universe society is strongly embedded in Christian faith, what I'm reading. In a way, you have the Garden of Eden. So you have the Darwinian theory, which is more to do with that we came from apes and we grew that way, which is still a theory in my opinion, but that's still that belief there. And you also have the ostrich head in the sand, that we're not really interested in looking at what we are and going beyond the cosmos.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And there's the conspiracy hypothesis, which to me, the two last components are more in line with what I believe and what I've experienced compared to the first one, right?
No. So there is, and so I have made no secret of the fact that that for the Exopolitics book, which I wrote in 1999, not for the Omniverse book, but for the Exopolitics book, a large exopolitical source that I used for that was a text called the Urantia book. That's a cosmological model, not a blueprint, but some of the concepts there are from the Urantia book.
Right. Yes. And you were reading that book probably back in 1973.
That was the first time I saw it, but during an extended stay in Melbourne, Australia, in 1982, I think 1981 or 1982, in 6 months, I read the whole book in very, in a very, that is, I read it in a way that I cross-checked everything with what I knew about empirical data. And it seemed to me that there was a lot of information that was correct there, as well as a lot of information that wasn't correct.
Now, you mentioned Dr. Stephen Greer earlier, and I could say that you mentioned also that the Universe Society of Intelligence planetary civilizations. I'm just reading, I'm quoting you
Yeah.
from the book, is a highly organized and civilized interstellar government that would not attack Earth. Yet we know that some of the warlike ET races exist. You have the Draco race, you've got some other ET races. So some of these ETs probably would like to enslave humanity rather than help them. So what do you think, the idea of a benevolent ET race will fit within the omniverse or the exopolitics, side of things, removing the negative aspect of them?
No, I think that we are. This is my view is that this is one of the most impacted planets around, and that humanity is hanging on by a thread.
Right, I agree. But we are still protected.
Oh yeah, but that there's a great mix here, and not only by negative ETs, but by an inorganic invading pathogenic artificial intelligence, which is also part of the mix.
Right.
And then there's a basic struggle in the galaxy and in the universe between the negative reptilian and the human race, which goes back to Lyra. And so there's a struggle for dominance in this galaxy and in this universe between the reptilian and the human civilization. And it's being played out here very, very deep at the dimensional level, at the mind control level, and especially here, where on this planet, where we've had a rebellion at the dimensional level at the spiritual level, not only the material political level, but at the spiritual level with the Lucifer rebellion. See, that's where the Urantia book perspective came in, because Earth is targeted not only from the extraterrestrial level, but from the spiritual level. And by the spiritual level, I mean politically. You're Sebastian, I'm Alfred. Those are our incarnational avatars. That's our time, energy, space, and matter identity. However, we have underlying non-local entities that are souls. Now, I don't know the name of my soul. I just don't know it. And I imagine that it has a name, and there are all sorts of properties to souls, but it's non-local, and it's here on an incarnational experience. So that's a game that's going on as well. And so, however, there's even competition between the reptilian souls and the human souls, and then there's the hybrid souls.
Right.
So this is a very complex ecology that we're in, and Earth is targeted because what we had is that we had defaults by people who were in positions of authority, who defaulted on their responsibilities of position in the spiritual order, according to versions. For example, Lucifer, Satan, etc.
So now we're going to be moving on to October of 2000. So this is like chronologically how you actually placed it in your book. So I'm just following the...
okay, yeah.
So we only have 2 hours, but because I won't be able to probably go through all the questions.
Oh, yeah.
If you're okay with that, we might approach it on a different day and to carry on the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But
that's okay.
So you made a speech at the Santa Clara Convention Center in the presence of the U.S. presidential candidates, and you said that we may have a decade or so to turn the direction of the petroleum nuclear civilization around. We are now in 2017. Do you believe that we have achieved any successes since 2000?
Yes and no. And the no part has to do with the hidden history of why I was directed. I didn't know why I was directed to write this 750-page book 7 years in advance of the 2025. And that is because of events that have happened, and all of the petrochemical companies now run the world. And so it's a dangerous situation because the off-planet pathogenic AI is now beginning its move toward the planet. Its disinformation was that the singularity would occur in 2045, whereas the singularity occurred in 2015. That's where the AI and the humanity achieved parity. And that's the current state of affairs on the planet as far as the singularity, by my estimation, and I've published papers on this. So that, you know, and I delivered an international paper in Warsaw in October of 2016 to that effect. And that's why I'm making this broadcast now with as much documentation as I can, that the AI is now making a bid for world domination.
So now I'm kind of jumping into 2013 because, again, it's kind of fits within that topic about AI. So you saw Exopolitics in 2013 as a way to deconstruct what you call the transhumanist agenda on Earth.
Yes.
So you believe that the EMF is one of the ways that people are being targeted. AI is another. Yes. So nanotechnology, which is, by the way, also embedded into our clothes, and it's in the atmosphere through chemtrails. You mentioned it already. So this kind of goes against what the majority of the people will say about chemtrails. They'll say, well, you know, we're trying to change the weather, and that's where it stops. So do you have the actual evidence to show that the chemtrails even happening from what I even believe in Comox on Vancouver Island? There are, you know, jets flying from there and spreading those chemtrails. Do you think that we have enough people now in, you know, on YouTube and on other channels to show that it goes beyond the weather changing patterns, and it does include nanotechnology?
Well, yes, there are. All of this now has been demonstrated at international conferences that, for example, the chemtrails contain, and that 80 to 100% of humans are now infected with the nanobots. And what happens is that the chemtrails contain nanobots, which 80 to 100% of humans breathe in. They go into the bloodstream, they jump the blood-brain barrier, they deploy as implants. The implants then are entrained to the PPAI, the pathogenic artificial intelligence that is broadcasting software from HARP and is entraining the human DNA. The Morgellons nanobots in the chemtrails are such that through the wine spittle test, 100% of humans now have Morgellons and are being terraformed into, at the DNA level, into AI robotoids. Those that are not yet on the way to being AI cyborg, it's because they have strong minds, strong focus, and strong souls. And the people that can really, the whistleblowers, are being greatly attacked physically with remotely given diseases like cancer, remotely being attacked in their eyesight, etc. The warners, the kind of the canaries in the coal mine, are being exterminated. And this planet is on its way to being a planet of cyborgs, in my professional judgment.
Well, my experience has been quite different, obviously, and I have covered that subject extensively through interviews too. And I believe that if we realize that we live in a program, and if you talk about AI, I believe, and from my experience, is that I've experienced the universe as part of a program, and that the Earth is part of the collective consciousness. So if we are trained and programmed at birth to realize, to see that the sky is blue and the grass is green, but if we change our consciousness, we can change the collective consciousness by tapping into the universal consciousness for understanding exactly how we can modify our environment. This is already mentioned in the Rainbow Prophecies in North America, where you have all the worldwide nations, going in a circle, and they don't mention holograms or programs or anything else, but they do say that the trees will regrow overnight. So how can you conceive that a tree can regrow overnight if this is not a program that we can change it based on our mindset by allowing our souls, which are energetic, we are energy. If we can altogether change this reality, the AI technology would just be irrelevant.
Yeah. So that's what I would call ascension, or the frequency shift, or the shift with the ascending Earth.
Right.
Now, the issue is that, and that's what we call fifth density. In other words, moving out of the duality consciousness of I win, you lose, into we are one.
Right.
And the issue is that if one looks at the mass statistics, are that the oceans are toxic and dying at the radioactive level, and that a large part of the biosphere is likewise radioactive and dying, and also at the DNA level, such that we who are either moving into or anchored at fifth density, how can we take such a mass and make it such that we have a full planetary and full biosphere ascension? There's supposed to be all sorts of solar events that will help do it. Every day I meet people who have been my allies, or who have had all of the information and evidence, and now they're so weak, they have cancer and they can't even get out of bed, and they have cancer because the frequency weapons have taken them down. And that's the problem, is that everything that was at a level to help us get to a large quantum is now under such attack. I agree with your personal consciousness, and I applaud it. However, we are at under such a level of attack. I mean, the only thing that I'm doing this broadcast today because I got the inner signal in 2015 that the AI was making a takeover bid for Gaia, Earth, and humanity, starting with Jade Helm in 2015. And that's why I'm here today. And I'm just one person. That's what got me here today. I wasn't supposed to do this till 2025. And so it told me to publish this memoir as a public record before the AI really became active.
What I'm saying is, I would just give you your example as a typical example of this. You were targeted. You felt that you had your full awareness arising from your traumas. And many people felt the same way. I also believe that in a catastrophic event, such as what could happen in the Ring of Fire, there will be an awakening happening on a mass scale that will allow people's consciousness to go to the next level, not to ascend, with their souls and to die off with their physical body, but to truly believing that they are gaining, raising their frequency, so they can offset a large number of people, which would allow us to then change our collective consciousness. That's what I truly believe in, and that's what I'm doing this in the first place. why I'm doing this program called Open Timelines is to say that yes, we are, like you said yourself, we are living on a very thin thread, and we could just
Right.
do more, but we still have that chance of changing that timeline. We are on this right timeline right now. Despite that the AI is present, who cares? At the end of the day, we just have to, remove the fear, because that's how people die off. They live in fear. If we just
I see.
if we stay put,
Okay, good.
and we can just change that concept, we will be better off.
Yeah. No, right. So the last half of the book is showing the positive timeline and setting out programs for creating a positive future. So
Yeah, I would like to ask you something about the Mars accounts and Andrew Basiago, because
yeah,
it's a very important fact to me. What I'm more interested in to discuss is the quantum time travel machines that Andrew has witnessed and other witnesses and whistleblowers
right.
talked about. Because to me, that if we were able to use those technologies, I know this is what the Department of Defense has access to, and I'm sure beyond that, why then the government, the US government, is not able to change any timelines, including the disasters of Syria and North Korea? Why can't they just simply use those technologies to erase what will happen or what may happen through EMF disturbance in the atmosphere for basically destroying whatever we have in America or Canada? Why do you think this is not happening?
Again, that's a very good question. And I think that there are a number of, and first of all, I have to say that I don't have access to classified information.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't give you an official answer, and I can't give you an answer based on correct data, nor have I taken any courses in time science, which are not available to the public. So I'm giving you just my best speculation. So there are a number of levels to that. One has to do one level of the answers has to do with the limits of time science and the nature of time, and the other has to do with who controls time and what I call the chronarchy, or the secret time travel government, because I believe that Earth and geopolitics, public affairs, and even down to a large level of private affairs in some cases are controlled by the chronarchy, which is the secret time travel government, because we live in a time-space hologram. And so far, humanity has fought for, with the Magna Carta and constitutions, for constitutional rights over space. I can move anywhere I want to, but humanity doesn't know that they're controlled in time. And so that's where they got them. And I discovered that because I've been manipulated in time, and I'm a constitutional lawyer. So, and I could have sued them starting in 1971 for illegal surveillance. Yeah, so first of all, the question that you ask is a matter of time science, because we know that all events in this time-space hologram are occurring now at once. They're all occurring now, and time is just, it's the technology of perception.
Right.
It's just how you perceive that. The question of intervention in flow and causation and all of that, I personally, we could have a long discussion about main timelines and causation and what sort of events can be changed or not, and what the interventions are. And it would be, just amazing. And in fact, we have Facebook groups that deal with that and with time anomalies. There are many. Yeah.
Time magazine published an article a few years ago about the technology that they were developing on time travel. And what's interesting about this, they were also mentioning that in order for the technology to exist, they need to have like a starting point and an end point. And if we don't have a starting point in, like Andrew talks about the times of Abraham Lincoln, how would anybody be able to have a starting point or device way back then in order to go back in time? Just what I mean?
No, well,
works.
There are two different types of devices that we're talking about. The first type of device, we would call it the chronovisor, the one that was invented by the Vatican, by two Vatican monks, by two out of their studies of Gregorian chant and all the things. And actually, time travel devices go back to ancient times, and Nostradamus, a curved glass and glass balls are forms of time travel devices, because what you're doing there is that you're using a technology to go to different addresses inside the time-space hologram or inside the time-space matrix. And as long as you have the address of a particular time, space, event, date, time, and location. Let's say if you're going back to Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg Address, the date, time, and location, that's the address of that event in time inside the time-space hologram. Well, then you can take a chronovisor, which are now very sophisticated. They even have 3D, they have holographic chronovisors. So it's no longer like a TV screen where you're just going to there and seeing it on a flat screen, but you can actually go inside the hologram and experience it there. And they're just recreating that there.
Because you mentioned, sorry to cut you off here, but you mentioned like Gettysburg, and Andrew Basiago claims that he went back there as a child, and he described it that he had these kind of long shoes and adult shoes, and that he went back to our current times, let's say modern times, in that field or in that street. So there was no devices, there was nothing around him to transport him back to a modern time. So how can that be?
Well, he was there. He went there via Stargate technology, via a certain technology. I don't have. Don't have the description of that technology, but it's one of 8 time travel technologies. It's a specific one that took him there and to that particular address in the time-space hologram and deposited him there. And there's the Cobb photograph, which has been curated at the Smithsonian of him there. Mm-hmm. And his father was there, actually. He and his father met at Gettysburg.
But he ignored him. His father ignored him, even if he was his handler.
Yeah. And also one of the key battles of the American Revolutionary War was won by time traveling in Andy and several of the children to advise George Washington of a strategic retreat. So, and he was told, and Washington later propagated that meeting as saying that he met with angels, but he met with childhood chrononauts from Project Pegasus.
Okay.
And so
I would like to keep reserve that thought for our next interview, Alfred, if you're willing to do.
Sure.
We're already almost into 2 hours of the interview now, and I think it would be a good time to stop.
Oh, good.
Catch up, in the future. But I really appreciate the time that you
Oh,
spent.
yeah.
I really enjoy, like I said, reading your memoirs, and I'm looking forward to read some more of your texts and also watch more of your interviews. But I think I will have more questions for you next time. And
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
until
thank
then,
you.
I thank you so much. Have a
Yeah,
good day. Thank
okay,
you.
good.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.